There is no doubt that under the PPPC government there has been development, there has been progress which all Guyanese are benefiting from. But just a few more days before election, we've managed to get an exclusive interview with the man himself, the presidential candidate of the PPPC party, Donald Ramotar. Yes, it is a pleasure having you here. Can you tell us, as always, when we invite our guests to come in the program, we encourage them to tell us something about themselves. So over to you. Who is Donald Ramotar?
Well, I was born in the Essequibo River, not on the coast, but in the river, a place they call Carria in the Essequibo River. My mother had a similar name like yours, Olive.
Olive.
So that's my first experience in life. In Carria, it was a river village. Timber was the main occupation of people there. My father had a timber concession, a small timber concession that he worked. And my early memories of life is going to school in Carria. When my first school was in Carria. I used to paddle boat to school or walk to school with my other brothers, with friends, relatives who we go to school with. And so those are my first memories of life in Carria. I came to Georgetown at quite a young age too, to continue schooling. And then after I finished school, I went back to Carria for a while, a year or two, where I helped my father on his timber grant. And then I came back to Georgetown in 1966, where I have remained since then.
And that is where you made your mark. That is where it started.
I came from a political family. My father was a strong supporter of the PPP. Our house was the area where the PPP used to come when they were campaigning in the riverine area, in our area, Carria, Saxacali, Hog Island, Trudy Island, these places. So probably I had a very early, on reflection, probably I had an early influence in my life. And I know my father used to subscribe to the newspapers, which we got once a week, collecting it from Wakenham to take home in Carria. And I used to, even at a young age, I used to look forward to reading Chetty Jagan's Straight Talk, his column in the Mirror. And I think when people ask me now, when I think about my life now, I think that probably had a very big impact on me. I'm reading Chetty Jagan's explanation of what was taking place in that time in our country. So that's in a nutshell who I am. And
was it from those bits of literature which your father would have subscribed for? Was that the influence and factor that made you?
That's the initial influence, I think. And when I came to Georgetown, I joined the party in 1967, the year after I came, in the Campbellville group. I worked with then Mr. Naubat, Hari Narayan Naubat, who is now in Canada as our ambassador, Narbada Prasad, and those are two of the notable comrades. Sukhdev Ramsarup, better known as Shogat, he died now too, like Narbada. And then we started to work in the Campbellville PPP group, doing activities, carrying out house-to-house work, going on campaigns to sell the Mirror, the Thunder, other issues. And then I got deeper and deeper involved as we went along in the political life, in the party's work. It was a very difficult period. I mean, of course, at that time I didn't realize how difficult it was. But looking back at it now, you can see it was a trying time in our country. And that's where my political career started. I probably came to the attention of the leadership because of my activism of the party. And in 1972, I was among others in the party, many of whom are still very active in the party, that went abroad to the then Soviet Union to study political science. I came back in 1973, got involved in the 1973 elections, worked in the party, kept working in the party, and moving from one stage to another. Eventually I went to the party's office in 1975 as manager of the office. The former manager, the one before my predecessor, had migrated. So they asked me to come over to manage the office, which I did until 1983, when I went to the then Czechoslovakia to represent the party in Europe as on the editorial council of the magazine Problems of Peace and Socialism. And I worked there until 1988 when I returned to Guyana. I returned then and worked with the GAU until 1993, when I went back to the Freedom House as the executive secretary of the party. And in 1997, after the demise of Dr. Jagan, I was elected to the position of general secretary, a position which I still hold.
Now, being a young politician coming from the Essequibo Island, you would have had...
Carriacari is not on the island, it's on the mainland.
Oh, it's on the mainland. I'm not very familiar. I'm not very familiar. Maybe we should take a tour there sometime.
Yes, sometime, yes.
Now, you being a young politician coming and working alongside stalwarts like the great Cheddi Jagan and even his wife, Janet Jagan, how has that experience shaped you? And up to this day, now you're nominated for the position of presidency of the party. How has that experience some 40 years ago mold you, shape you, and influence you at this point in time?
Well, I think probably the biggest impact on me is the example, the selflessness, the hard work and the dedication of party leaders like Cheddi Jagan, Janet Jagan, as you mentioned. But there were others like Ram Karan, Maki Hamid, many other leaders of the party who I had an opportunity to work with, E.M.G. Wilson. These were all very hard-working, dedicated people who had no other agenda but to try to see how they can improve the quality of life for the Guyanese people. And at that time, when we were in the dictatorship period, the PNC dictatorship, very important was to try to win back democracy to our country. Because we felt very strongly then, as I do still now, that you can't have sustained economic and social progress unless you have political democracy. I don't think that these things can be separated, that they all go together as one package, that no matter what good plans you have, if it is not being implemented in the atmosphere of freedom and democracy, it will not, I feel very strongly that it will not succeed.
Let us make a comparison back in the 60s and now we're in the 21st century. Obviously a lot of lead road was made into making Guyana a more democratic country. People have now the right to vote, they have a right to express themselves, even job opportunities and so on are created. Making the comparison between the 60s and now, how do you see how are people perceiving election, government, policies overall? What are people's perception?
Well, you know, from 1968 right through to 1985, elections in our country were rigged, massively rigged, and therefore the elections in our country in that period did not really express the results of those elections did not really express the will of the people. And I think that caused a lot of alienation from the people, and the government got very much alienated from each other. The government became unaccountable because they stopped depending on the people to put them in power, and because they had their own mechanism in rigging elections to put them there. And as a result of that, the abuse of power was great in our society. And I think that was most responsible for the decline in Guyana, because, you know, our country was right up there as one of the more developed countries in the region up to 1964. And the decline really started from 1968 when the elections in our country started to be rigged. And this alienation that I spoke to you about began then as well. And as the government became more and more unpopular with the masses, they became more and more repressive. They became intolerant to views that were not their views. They could not stand any kind of demonstration. They were very violent in breaking these things up. And really they stifled the full flourishing of social life within the society. And that all of those things, I think, contributed to the great decline that took place in Guyana. And that's so much so that, according to the group of Commonwealth economists who came here in the early 90s to say that we were then, together with Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Wow.
That group was headed by Sir Alastair McIntyre. So the decline was really very sharp, and we stopped being one of the more developed countries in the region to go to the bottom of the ladder.
Now, with the great Chadi Jagan, the platform democracy was set. Now, His Excellency Bar Jagde continued to sustain that democracy. You, being the next in line, come November 28th, November 29 morning. Donald Ramotar, new president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
We have to wait until the last vote is counted.
How do you intend to sustain and to ensure that Guyana maintains its democracy, that there is stability and unity among the people?
Well, first of all, I think we have to strengthen our institutions, and we have to adhere to the tried and tested method in democratic societies, where you really have a separation of powers, with separation of the executive, the parliament, and the judiciary, because they act independently, but they act as checks and balances against each other. So I think those things has to be strengthened within our society, and we have to be a law-governed society, law-based, that we must adhere to the laws. The laws, of course, must be just laws, debated, discussed in the parliament. We have gone a far way already in the parliament to making it more as a body that is both deliberative, with a lot of discussions. We have established standing committees in the National Assembly. Those things would continue and will be strengthened. As our economy gets stronger, we will strengthen the resources of those things to establish them more. And I would like to see more of our more complicated bills going to select committees, where not only the opposition will be able to have a say in influencing legislation, but also some of them should be open to the public, for the public to make their contribution in making some of our laws and so forth, so that we can have really just laws, and we can constantly have them under review. We have in the parliament also a body that will constantly review the constitution and review our laws to see how they're going. That should be activated and be more active, and more participation of the various forces in the society in the governance of the society. So that is how I envisage that we will work. Greater participation. I will be a president that will listen to the opposition forces, and anyone who comes to me with suggestions and proposals that is based on the development of the interests of this country, they will find a receptive ear in me.
You have mentioned twice, including the opposition in decision making, ensuring that certain complicated bills are passed. Is that very important to you?
It is important. You know, since way back in our party, when we were in opposition, when we had a very undemocratic system in place, we were trying to find ways and means to get back to democracy as painlessly as possible. And we had even proposed to the PNC to give the PNC a way out of their undemocratic ways that they were functioning. And we had even proposed to them national front government, which they rejected. And we have, in 2003, we came out with a proposal. It was presented to the public by President Jagdeo in the presence of myself and Prime Minister Sam Hines, in which we said that we were not closing the door to any kind of power sharing, but we believe that we have to build trust in the society, that you can't work within the executive arm of the government unless we trust each other. And I think a lot of work, the only way we can build trust is by working together, like in these parliamentary committees and in other areas, on national tasks, that we can work together, we can break down the distrust that still exists. We have a lot to be suspicious about with the PNC. I have publicly said some of them when I had a meeting with the private sector at Pegasus not so long ago, pointing out the several times that we thought we had agreement with the PNC and the opposition, and they reneged on them. So I don't think that those things help. So I believe that we have to continue to work in different areas to build trust. The PPP civic government has done a lot in that regard. We are the only government in the Caribbean that has allowed the opposition to name their nominee on state boards, important state boards, to get more inclusive. I would like to continue those things and to strengthen them, and to have maybe more structured discussion with them so that we can see how we can together not see ourselves just as government and opposition, that has to happen too, but at the same time to see how we can marry ideas and put personalities aside and look at the ideas that would be in the best interest of our country, to see how they could be implemented so that we can realize our potential in Guyana.
Now, let us look at some of the issues that people are raising, and one of it being security. A lot of people are very concerned about their personal security and national security, particularly with the evolution of crime. Under Donald Ramotar tenure, what will be your plan to ensure that each and every Guyanese is safe to leave their door in the mornings and to get back home safely? What will be your plan?
Well, I don't think that I can point to you a one silver bullet or one action that has to be done to correct that. I think we have to take a holistic approach to it. The security situation is not only the police. I think it's linked also to the judiciary and to the prison sectors, the reforms and so forth in the prisons. So I think we have to look at it in a totality and have a total reform. Right now I know that we have a judicial reform taking place. That should be accelerated to work faster so that we can have justice being delivered in a swifter manner. We should also have, within the prison system itself, stronger programs to try to reform people who have been caught up in acts of crime, and so particularly first offenders. Instead of them graduating to become bigger and bigger criminals, I think we should try our best to see if we can have them reformed, and probably using education, teaching them some skills in the prison, some life skills and general education can probably help in that regard. And in the police force itself, we have to do a lot more training in the police force. We have to build back a strong, like for want of a better word, SWAT team, but at the same time to have a general look at the police in general, to train them, to make them more people's oriented, more service oriented, to see themselves as providing an important service to the society, to see themselves as being part of the whole developmental trust, because as you implied in your question, security is also vital in social and economic development. And therefore I think that is the orientation that we have to give to the force, that their role is vital for the development of the society, and they should be trained in that way to realize that they are not only enforcing the law, but providing a service to the society to create a secured environment so that we can reproduce our lives in that environment.
Now, taxes. Everybody shouting taxes. Even the end customer are complaining that taxes too high. The oppositions, they're saying, we want to reduce tax. What is your take on the tax system, and particularly the VAT, and what do you intend to do to minimize the shouts of taxes?
Well, I have committed myself already to have a review of the tax system. I don't necessarily agree with what the opposition is saying about the tax system, because the VAT, when the VAT was introduced, it replaced several other taxes, including the consumption tax, which was a hidden tax, and which was 30%. So the VAT replaced that system. At the same time, I think that that many of the items, the essential items on medicine, on educational materials, on essential food items, etc., on school clothes, school uniforms, and so forth, government has removed the VAT on those things. So a lot of things, VAT is not affecting a lot of ordinary people in many, many ways. But at the same time, I must say that VAT has also been efficient in helping us to collect more revenue. And because of the fact that we were able to collect more revenue, we were able to do much more in the social sector. But as I've said, I have committed myself that it should be reviewed to see if, you know, if there's any reduction can be done. But I cannot commit myself to that without, first of all, having a review of the system as a whole.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, there's no doubt that there has been development in Guyana. We look around, bigger, newer infrastructure, roads, technology. There's been a massive boost in the technology industry here in Guyana. Now, under the PPPC government, there are some programs, projects which have been pointed out in the manifesto. One being the one laptop per family. You have the hydro project, the deep water harbor. How do you intend to execute this? Already the one laptop per family is already in its distribution phase. But for the other two, how do you intend to ensure that all Guyanese are receiving the benefits of these other two big projects which have been pointed out in the manifesto?
Well, the hydropower is very, very essential, because I think that we could have developed even further and faster if we had cheap energy within our society. And if you look around us, look around at all our neighbors, we are probably the only ones who don't have cheap energy. So I think that is vital to bring that into fruition, because it impacts on a lot of things that for our country. Because we talk about one of the issues, one of the problems we have in the society is the question of job creation, to create more jobs, so that young people who are becoming more educated now, leaving school, leaving university, looking for jobs within their own area of discipline, and sometimes finding it difficult to find those jobs. So I think that with cheap energy, we can attract much more investment into manufacturing, into processing. We can transform our countryside, because our agriculture can become a raw material base for agro-processing. So to me, that is extremely vital for us at this point in time to get that off the ground, because I think it will open the possibility of creating jobs for people generally, young people in particular. It will expand the real economy, the productive sector of economy will develop and be strengthened, and it will even increase the servicing sector of the society, because as that sector becomes bigger and larger, it needs to have a lot of services. So I think that to me is a big one. Another big one is the Deepwater Harbor, because that will allow us, right now I know that we can limitedly only export a certain volume of things and import in only a small volumes. So I think with a Deepwater Harbor, we can have importation and exportation in bigger volumes and benefit from economies of scale in that regard. Also, we have to be looking at the possibilities to work towards seeing the possibilities of getting the road, the Lindem-Lethem road going. If we can get that going, that would be an additional benefit and a greater need for a Deepwater Harbor, because it will become attractive for northern Brazil to do their import and export through Guyana, which could earn us quite a bit of resources too.
So in another 5 years, Guyana will be much more driven by commerce.
Yeah,
and lots more young people would have jobs, and families will be much more secure financially.
That is the plan, that is the intention, and that is the orientation that we are taking.
Wonderful. Now let us go down a different road now. We've talked about development, we've talked about yourself. Now let us examine some of the criticisms that are directed towards the PPPC government. The PPPC government has been accused of discrimination, corruption and racism. Being the presidential candidate heading for the big day, E-Day, November 28, what is your take on that? And what would you like to say to those persons who are making those allegations and to the voters out there?
Yeah. Well, let's take the racism one first. And that's a big issue. Many people are troubled by that. But I think we have demonstrated that we are a party very even-handed. If you look at our record since we've been in government, the resources of this country have been given to areas where they needed it and was not given to areas only because they were people of one ethnic group or another ethnic group. That consideration has never come about. We put hospitals in every area that we could have afforded it and where it was needed. Schools, we put it in every area that it was needed and where it was needed. We built more than and renovated more than 1,000 schools since we got into the government. So my own view, however, I have a little bit of a different view than many of the views that have been expressed. I would agree that there's some level of some prejudice, individual prejudice from time to time. But racism generally, when you talk about racism from a political, social point of view, it is generally linked to economics. And it is generally where you have the practice of one race being exploited to benefit another race. Like we had in apartheid South Africa, and even in the segregated United States, we've seen that those things had existed. In our country, I think it's skin deep because I don't think any of the racial issues are rooted in our economics. That in a general sense, the people in this country more or less live at the same level, and even some studies that was done by the University of Guyana showed clearly that sometimes that the reduction of poverty more in the urban areas than in the rural areas, which also shows that in the urban areas more Afro-Guyanese live than you have than Indo-Guyanese. So I think that is more being whipped up for political purposes, and it is not. While I'm not denying that there is some level, some people sometimes got some prejudices. I don't think that we can talk about it in the same light that you will talk about racism in many other countries. However, at the same time, I think the institutions are important too. We have set up the Ethnic Relations Commission, and the opposition has done every single thing to attack the commission, to degrade the commission, because they still want to use racism as a tool in their political life. I think the main thing is to try to depoliticize it so that we can deal with anyone who feels that they're discriminated. There's some place that they can go to make a complaint, to have it investigated fairly, and to deal with these issues. The other issue you talk about, corruption.
Let's see how would you deal with corruption?
Corruption exists in our society. There's no doubt about that. But I think it is rooted also in our history. And that is why it's so difficult to uproot at this point in time. The very fact that people used to thief for whole elections was itself a massive corruption. And the very fact that they didn't have no accountability, it was itself, corruption was a way of life. Very fact that parliamentarians were bribed openly to cross the floor to give the PNC government at that time votes to control different state apparatus was itself entrenching corruption in our society. We have established a lot of systems to root out corruption from our society. But I must admit that sometimes they're subverted. They're subverted largely because of collaboration. So I think we have to relook at those systems, probably move people around more, probably have a stronger auditing bodies, strengthening of the auditing section in our society, and have stronger punishment for them. I think the police should have a stronger system where they can get involved to deal with the corrupt system. One of the systems that we have put in place that we wanted to name and shame people. That is why we allowed the camera. It was me who put the motion in Parliament that the cameras should go into the Public Accounts Committee So when the Public Accounts Committee is questioning government officials, people can see a face. Because the government gets the blame for everything, whether the people who are corrupt are PPP supporters or not. So I wanted people to see a face when they were talking about this corruption, so that you can have a moral pressure too within the society. But unfortunately, the opposition used it more like a political tool instead of using it for what it was really intended for, in naming and shaming people. But yes, we will have no tolerance with corruption. We will fight it, we will root it out, and wherever it is found, we will deal with it.
Okay. Now, in wrapping up, quickly, what would you say to those voters out there?
Well, I think that our party in government has a record that you can see that we could be trusted, that we try to ensure that our actions and our words are closely matched, that we work very, very hard to implement all our promises. If you look from 1992 to 2006, you will see that we have a very high percentage of implementation of our manifesto promises. And that is very, very important for credibility. And I will certainly continue to follow that line to ensure that all that we've promised, that we fulfill them. And along the way, all the problems that we confront, that we hope to confront them together with our people to try to solve them in the interest of our people, and to ensure that we have a very fair, no one should have any fear of the PPP civic government as far as discrimination is concerned, because we have a record that we can point to, that we have distributed the resources of this country in a very equitable manner. And I think we can be trusted, and I am ready to work with everyone whose interest is for development, that you will find a friend in the PPP Civic and in Donald Ramotar as president.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ramotar, and best wishes on November 28th. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And remember, on November 28th, remember where to put your X next to the cup. Bye now.
My cup.